Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Austin, Texas. I'm Judith Sebesta, Executive Director of the Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas, aka Digitex. Welcome to the inaugural webinar in our new bi-monthly series, Hot Topics in Digital Higher Education. I'll give information about our next webinar at the end of this one. But speaking of this one, in celebration of Open Education Week, today's webinar focuses on OER course marking in Texas. Our facilitator is Ursula Pike, Associate Director of Digitex and former coordinator of the OER initiative at Austin Community College. So I'll turn it now over to Ursula.
Thank you, Judith. Can everyone hear me fine? All right, well, great. I'm really excited about this webinar today. And I just want to remind everybody before we start that we'll have Q&A at the end of the webinar. And then we will post this recording on the Digitex YouTube site. And we'll send a link out to all that after it concludes. Also, we have closed captioning by the amazing Molly Thompson from Caption Sync. It's a really great feature of these webinars. So if you need to start that now, I believe you can do it. All right. Well, first, I want to, we already did that. I want to talk about our presenters for this webinar. First, we'll be hearing from Scott Hochberg, and he is an OER public policy consultant and a former member of the Texas House of Representatives. Scott will give some background on the Texas OER legislation. And then we have Michelle Reed, and she is an associate librarian and the director of OER at the University of Texas at Arlington and a former Spark Open Education Leadership Fellow. Here's what Michelle had to say about this picture. It best represents my experiences with course markings. I can't wait to hear what she has to say about the Texas toolkit for OER course markings. So, Scott, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great. So when you want me to advance the slide, just let me know.
Okay. Why don't you advance the slide? There we go. Otherwise, we could sit and look at Michelle's picture for a while. It's sort of hard to follow, actually. So thank you, Digitex, for all that you were doing. And thank you for inviting me to participate today. There are a number of states that have course marking laws and requirements. Texas is not the only one. It's one of, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The coloration has nothing to do with who they voted for yesterday, but rather indicates those that specifically talk about OER versus marking affordable courses. The questions come up a number of times, why the difference? Why would you just have OER? And I think the answer is real simple. The idea for course marking came from people who were working on OER. And so it's not that there was any bias against other methods of affordable course marking, but it was one of those things that I don't think the subject ever came up in those states. Maybe that'll change. Want to move on to the next slide? I need a little beeper or something. So the course marking requirement is from Texas Senate Bill 810, which was passed in June of 2017 to take effect in the spring semester of 2018. And it basically added 2 requirements related to course markings. First, there was prior to Senate Bill 810, dating back all the way to 2011, a Texas statute requiring a listing of required and recommended textbooks be included in the course schedule or linked from the course schedule. And so Senate Bill 810 added to that a requirement that essentially said if it's an OER textbook, flag it as such. And second, knowing how difficult it is to sort of work backwards in those listings from price back to a course, whereas most of those listings are set up that you start with the course and the section, and then you get to the textbook. The bill says if you have a search function in there, make OER part of the search function. Let's go on to the next slide. So the first requirement is on the textbook list, and that in Texas Education Code 51452 for those who would like to look it up directly. And generally, this entire slide, the requirements on this slide were passed as part of HB 33 way back in 2011. The only thing that was added by Senate Bill 810 was the very last line in bold, in that the textbook listings had to add whether the textbook is an open educational resource. Let's go on to the next slide. So if we're going to be marking textbooks, we have to know what the statute considers a textbook to be. And it's a pretty standard definition. It's a book primarily published for instruction in connection with a particular course or courses offered to post-secondary students by an institution of higher education, and the supplemental material designed to go with that textbook. Remember, if you go back to 2011 and why this all came about, it was about concern about the pricing of textbooks. So if you were offering, like I did in a course that I taught, a consumer book, a popular title, that's really not required to be on this list. Only textbooks and material directly supplemental to the textbook are required to be on the list. And so OER materials technically were always required to be on this textbook list. The addition is that they need to be flagged as OER. The truth is, a lot of OER textbooks didn't make the list for a reason I'll get to later. But again, the only addition here is that an OER textbook needs to be flagged. That doesn't mean that general OER materials need to be put on this list. It only refers to OER textbooks. So I would argue that an OpenStax book, for instance, needs to be on the list. But if you have a professor who is using a series of journal articles that can be accessed through the library's licenses, those don't have to appear on the textbook list. Let's go on to the next slide. Just briefly, what deadlines apply to placement of materials on this textbook list. Those date back to the old HB 33 language. As soon as practicable after the institution has compiled the course schedule, but not later than the 30th day before the first day of classes. And if the information changes, it should be posted as soon as practicable. Again, these are provisions that were already existing, and SB 810 just sort of bootstrapped into those. Next slide, please. And so here's one reason why this gets all confusing, is that when HB 33 was originally passed, and the federal legislation that it was modeled after, the responsibility for posting the textbook list rested initially with the institution, but the institution got an exception to it if the bookstore, if the official college bookstore provided that same information. And in general experience, that's where it's happened. The bookstore, of course, has a motivation to get the student to come directly to the bookstore's site, and they have all the pricing information. But as you've probably found out, if you're on this, if you're listening to this webinar, a lot of times OER textbooks didn't get on that list because the bookstore, unless they were using the printed version of an OER text, really didn't care if a course was using OER because they weren't selling the textbook. So it was designed to make it easier to do, but with the addition of OER specifically, it may have made it harder. On to the next slide. So the second part of SB 810's requirements is for a search function. And this says that if there is a search function in the course schedule system, that an OER search term in some manner needs to be added to allow the student to check OER or type in OER or do something that would bring up a list of courses or sections that use only OER materials. Now, this doesn't talk about textbooks. It talks about the textbook list and refers to a textbook list, but this is really information about courses or sections. So if a course uses OER, regardless of whether it's a textbook, and if it's exclusively OER, then it needs to be responsive to the search function, although you don't have to itemize specifically what materials are being used, unless, of course, it's an OER textbook, in which case it belongs on the list. I'm absolutely certain I've probably said that in such a confusing way that there will be questions about that later, but that's fine. Next slide. What's considered an open educational resource? The standard definition. It's the definition you all would be familiar with. Next slide. What institutions are included in the SB 810 requirement? This one, I will tell you, I will confess, fooled me. And in fact, in our pre-webinar discussion the other day, I said with total certainty the wrong answer to this, and Michelle was kind enough to very gently correct me. And it's really, the confusion is really based on a really poor bit of drafting in the old HB 33. So generally in the Texas Education Code, whenever it refers to an institution of higher education, it is the definition you see near the middle of the page, which clearly says public 1, 2, 3, 4 times that I count. It only refers to public institutions because, frankly, that's pretty much where the jurisdiction of the Higher Education Coordinating Board lies. But in HB 33, the original textbook bill, it was decided late in the game to add private institutions into the requirement. And so instead of saying institution of higher education and private institutions, or coming up with some new term that encompassed both, it had its own definition, which just applies to the subchapter on textbooks. And it says, strangely, an institution of higher education means an institution of higher education, as defined by the definition in the middle of the page, or a private or independent institution of higher education as defined elsewhere in the definitions section in the code. So they basically redefined the same term to mean 2 different things within the same body of law. So private institutions clearly are included. I am not sure how the coordinating board would enforce that or who would enforce that, but under the language of the law, both public and private institutions are required to follow it. On to the next slide. So the bottom line is, first of all, only OER textbooks and supplemental materials specifically designed for those textbooks need to be on the textbook list, although that was already a requirement. Those textbooks need to be flagged as OER on the textbook list. If there's a search function in the course schedule, it needs to allow a student to search for OER courses or sections, though it does not need to list the specific OER materials, other than, of course, meeting the other OER textbook requirement. And the textbook listing law and the search law applies to public and private institutions, and has since 2011, in fact, as part of that section that deals with the textbook listings. And with that, I'll pass the baton on to Michelle and hang around for questions later.
Great. Scott, thank you so much. That was really good information. All right, Michelle, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and you should be able to share your screen.
Hello, first let's check the sound. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm looking for my slides. many windows open. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can see them and they're in the present mode.
Okay. I don't know how to change that. Let's see. Yep. Okay, what do you see now?
I no longer see your slides.
Of course not. And I'll start my video too. Sorry for the technical difficulties. We tried this the other day and everything worked fine.
Now I see you.
Okay.
And now I see your slides and you.
Great. Okay. I have lost my controls, but we'll see how this goes. So hi, everyone. Thank you for making time to join us today. I'm Michelle Reed. I'm the Director of Open Educational Resources here at the University of Texas at Arlington. And I'm going to talk a little about our process implementing course markings on our campus, talk about some resources that I've been a part of creating. So first of all, that did not move. There we are. A little about our timeline. So the bill was passed in summer of 2017. I was in my first year as an open education, a brand new open education librarian here at UTA, and was watching the bill very closely. It had a number of other things besides course markings, but that was the main thing that I was paying attention to because I knew not a lot of people were paying attention to it on our campus. And it seemed like a really important opportunity for us to take advantage of. Obviously a legal requirement as well. So shortly after that, I started having conversations with a variety of stakeholders, trying to understand what our options were. And we didn't have, at the time, we didn't have any kind of institutional budget to support OER. We had a $20,000 budget from the libraries for our grant program, but there was no funding to really do any broad changes to our student information system or any other kinds of systems. So we were really limited in how we could roll out a compliance solution. In October of 2017, I met with our university administration for the first time and presented the information I'd found about what we can do and what my recommendation was moving forward. And that was my first meeting ever with high-level university administration, and was the first clue for me that the work of an open education librarian specifically is significantly different than the kind of librarianship that I was used to. So the plan was approved, and as we move through the second half of the presentation, I'll talk a little more about why we made some of the decisions that we made. But in short, we integrated into the existing SIS. We chose to adopt the language of free and low cost instead of OER, and there were a few reasons for that. But we created two separate values in our SIS, and chose to create a separate Qualtrics form for reporting those courses rather than going through the bookstore, which is how all of the other resource adoptions are reported. And spring of 18, we piloted the plan with a very small number of faculty members. So we targeted the departments of history, College of Business, and the College of Nursing. Then we had a few, all of the known open educational resource adopters were also invited to participate in the pilot. After that, we collected feedback from everyone in the pilot. I didn't really make any revisions. We did do some revisions over time, but we started rolling out in the summer to have courses for fall of 2018 tagged before the semester started. So a quick look at what ours looks like. This is in our schedule of classes, and you can see it is nowhere on the main screen. You have to really know what you're looking for to be able to find this. So you have to click additional search criteria, and then moving down from that under course attribute, it's incredibly varied. We've used educational resource cost. If you don't select anything from here, it's going to pull back both the free and the low cost educational resources. But you can also select one value from the course attribute value dropdown and get either free or low cost. So that low cost was capped at $25. That was, I looked around at the use of like online homework platforms that wrap around OER. And at the time, those were priced at $25. And so we thought that would be a good starting point. The whole idea, though, was that this was a temporary pilot, not a long-term solution. And we would come back to the conversation and figure out what worked and what didn't, and how we could improve. And that piece hasn't actually made it here yet. So we still have lots of conversations to go to figure out a way to make this more effective. But so far it's working relatively well. If you do that search for educational resource costs, this is what the results look like. So you can see on the actual class list with all of the schedule, with all of the sections listed, there's no indication there that something's an OER. And so if you're a student and you're searching, you don't know about the filter and you're searching for a class just like you would any other class, there's nothing here on the search results that would suggest that the course uses free content or low cost content. There's the buy books column, which takes you to the bookstore's website. And from there, if the information is reported and reporting accurately, then there will be a note saying the course uses OER. But in many cases, and especially early on, the message that students got was that course materials hadn't been decided yet. So a little bit misleading in how the information is presented, unless you know that you're searching for free resources, and then it is clear on the list. And so you can have to drop down into the class attributes otherwise to see if it's a free resource or a low cost resource. So that is what the search looks like in our schedule. I want to talk a little about the Texas toolkit, because it was something that I was working on as I was kind of working on a tool to help other institutions across the state do the work that I was really trying to sort out on my own with very little guidance. And at the time, I think Texas was a really early adopter. We've had, did Scott say 6 or 7 now? It changes so quickly, I can't keep up. But we were very early to the conversation, and there were a number of resources that have been published since then, but at the time there was not much out there to help. And so I wanted to create something that would make that process a little easier for other people. I was part of the Spark Open Education Leadership Program, and I needed to do a capstone project, and this seemed like a really good fit for that project. So if you want to take a look at the toolkit, the link is up there. I'm going to use this to talk through some of I mentioned having those stakeholder conversations pretty early on. I'm going to use our stakeholder page to talk through what some of those conversations were about. So first, obviously, university administration is incredibly important to bring into this conversation. In our case, they were, as far as I know, they were learning about the requirement from us, from the libraries, not from other sources. And so in many cases, I think we were seeing low numbers, and Ursula's going to talk about the reporting that's been done across the state, a survey that's been done recently. There's still pretty low numbers of institutions that are compliant with the regulation. And so I think there's a connection there between those early conversations with administrators and who is bringing that conversation forward. Libraries are very frequently involved in OER efforts. And so if you have a legal requirement that's connected to OER, it's a good thing to get them involved. I think here at UTA, we're a little bit of an outlier in that I was really leading this effort. I don't know that we see a lot of that leadership coming from libraries. I think it's very frequently either task force or, of course, the bookstores are heavily involved. And of course, none of this can happen without faculty awareness and faculty buy-in. And so in all of our conversations with faculty, we try to remind them of the reporting requirements, the process for reporting, the reasons why early and accurate reporting are so critical. And there are a number of reasons why early and accurate reporting are important. But it's still a struggle, and a lot of it is a struggle between just academic culture and academic timelines and expectations from the state, the legislature, and they don't always align. And so in some cases, we're asking faculty to report their resource use for courses that haven't been assigned to them yet. In some cases, they may not know what they're teaching until right at the last minute. In some cases, they may be inheriting a course that someone else made resource decisions for, and they want to revise that. So there's a lot of ways that this can go wrong or become difficult for everyone involved. So this is why I started with a picture of myself as a baby crying, because it seems pretty straightforward on the surface, but it becomes incredibly complex very quickly. I will say before we move from this page, having that conversation and buy-in from administration is really important in getting the word out to faculty. So early on, there was a conversation between me, our bookstore, and our provost about communicating the changes to reporting requirements because the OER reporting was a change. The provost now every semester sends an email out on behalf of myself and our bookstore manager asking people to, remember the reporting requirements and directing them to the appropriate place to do that. And I'll just mention this now. We had a situation last semester. The provost sent the email out, and it's a combination. It's not just OER reporting, but for OER reporting, that goes through a Qualtrics form that the library oversees. For all other resources, it goes to the bookstore through the Follett Discover tool, which is in the LMS. We have Canvas. And so the last time the provost sent the email out, the courses hadn't been created in Canvas yet. And so we just got flooded with emails about how they couldn't find the Follett Discover tool to report their resources, but it's because none of the courses were live yet. So there's lots of timeline issues and complications with the process that you really need to think through and ensure that everyone's on the same page. Some other central stakeholders for these conversations, obviously registrars are incredibly important. The conversation that I had with our records office was really, what can we do? Like, what kind of flexibility do we have for getting this information into the system without having the funding to customize anything? And the answer was there wasn't very much that we can do. And so the decision to include this in the advanced search filter under attributes was really the only thing that our registrar said we could do without a long-term financial investment. Campus stores, we've talked a little about them already. I will just say that I was the person who suggested that we work through a Qualtrics form for OER rather than going through the campus store. And that was related to, I got into Follett Discover and started looking around at how OER were tagged and labeled and how easy it was to discover that content, and found that a number of open textbooks were not tagged as OER, and there were a number of other resources. And I think these are perhaps things that had been uploaded by individual faculty. I don't really know how they got there, but there were things that were tagged as OER that clearly were not open. and neither were they free. And so it was a little concerning to, when we're trying to get the message out to everyone about what open means, and for us, that permissions piece is incredibly important and central to our work. I was concerned that we might lose some of that message and just confuse people if we tried to integrate directly into the store's existing reporting mechanisms. And then finally, students. They are incredibly important to include in early conversations, and can, in some cases, and this wasn't the case here at UTA, but Kansas State is an example of this, where students were actually leading the effort to integrate some kind of course marking solution on their campus. Our students, I primarily worked with student government. Our student government president was very active and interested in OER at the time. And again, this was 3 years ago. So I had lots of conversations with her as we were moving forward about the low cost cutoff, and the feedback there was pretty much 25 sounds great. We didn't do any kind of formal survey, though if you have the time, I certainly suggest surveying students about what they think a reasonable low cost threshold is. Washington State did that very effectively, and used that to make some revisions to how they recommend moving forward with course markings. Our students were also really helpful in helping us see things that we otherwise couldn't see. And so this is an example. We were really focused on getting this into the search filter in our schedule of classes. Whether logged in or not, I always saw the same thing. And so that's where we were really doing our work. And in a conversation with Katie, the president at the time, she asked me about the schedule planner, and I had no idea what she was talking about, because you have to be an enrolled student to see this, but this is where students go largely to make decisions about their courses. And so that was an easy thing to get turned on, but it was just not something that I was aware of or looking for, because I've never seen the system. So getting students involved can really help you see things like this that will help them that you otherwise just may not be aware of. So this is an old screenshot. It now has the same thing that you see on the other screenshots, where it's educational resource cost. We also have worked with student government more recently to get the word out to students, because we were limited in how we implemented. Everything is buried and hard to see if you don't know what you're looking for. So we did some flyers and with instructions and digital signs and other social media outreach, various things. We tend to time that around when registration opens each semester. But this week, our student government is tabling for Open Education Week, and they're handing out flyers to students and helping them understand that this is a feature that is there for them and can help them, particularly if they encounter any financial hardships. So that's, and we have a guide too. It has other stuff beyond the flyer, but if you want to take a look at those instructions a little more closely, all of that information is on the Open for UTA Cares, Open for UTA Students Guide. So I mentioned my work really started when I was in the Spark program, working on my capstone project and figuring out how to do all of this on my own. After we published the toolkit, which was in the spring of 2018, I was contacted by the Rebus community and asked if I would like to lead a pilot project for a beta platform that's intended to help contributors of open textbooks find each other. So it's really intended to help build that collaboration, multi-institutional collaboration that helps us go further faster. So I agreed. I was very fortunate to have two incredible co-editors join me. We would never have made it as far as we have without them. There's about 35 contributors for the text. It features 9 case studies and then some higher level content as well. We'll take a quick look at the table of contents in a moment. But the book has undergone peer review. We had about 35 peer reviewers as well who got into the text and gave us incredible feedback this fall. So if you are on the call and you're one of those people, thank you so much. Your feedback was incredibly helpful. We've gone through a revision process and the book is now in copy editing. So we're very hopeful that we'll have this published by the end of the spring semester. So stay tuned for that. This is a quick look at what the table of contents looks like. So again, some policy pieces. So talking specifically about what the legislation looks like in all of those states where this is passed. And it's been a struggle with policy in some of the other sections as well, because the landscape is changing so quickly. And so we've added, every few months we have to add another state. And I was talking to my co-editors, Jessica and Sarah, recently. There's some conversations happening in Maryland. And I said, it's likely that there will be another state for us to add before we publish. And so our book's going to be outdated like immediately, which I guess is just the way it goes. But so policy, we talk about state legislation as well as some federal legislation and how you can go about implementing that on your campus. Talk through various stakeholder groups, including students. My toolkit only mentions those 6 stakeholder groups that I discussed earlier, but it's not intended to be an inclusive list, an exhaustive list. One stakeholder group that I didn't include much information about on the toolkit that's incredibly important to get involved is advisors. So they can help get the word out to students as well, and just having them aware that functionality exists can be really helpful for students who are struggling with their course load or struggling with financial factors that impact their ability to enroll in a high level of courses. So mechanics talks a little about student information systems, the catalog itself, or the schedule itself. We talk about different vendors and what customization might look like, and all of the complications that come along if you choose to customize your system. Talk a little about branding and communication. So how do you get the word out? How do you ensure everyone's on board? Lots of discussion in there about logos and how you design those, and the language that we use, how we set thresholds, whether we use OER versus free or low cost, etc. And by the way, this book started as with a focus on OER course markings. That was the title, Marking OER Courses. And through reading over the case studies as they started coming in, it became clear that most people aren't marking OER specifically. They're using a broader language, whether it's free or low cost or no cost. Very few people are actually using OER for those. And there's both, some benefits to doing so as well as some concerns. And we tried to discuss those in the book. Then we have an impact section, which was especially challenging to write because there's not a lot of research on the impact of course markings, and that's what we were trying to cover there. So a lot of it is theoretical, and again gets to that distinction between free and OER. And if we're looking to evaluate the impact of OER, but we're marking things as free, that can impact our research. So lots of considerations there. I mentioned earlier a number of resources have been published since I started work on the toolkit. And so we cover some of those in further readings. And then we have 9 case studies from community colleges, four-year colleges, and systems all across the US, including one in Canada. And so you'll see who we're featuring there. We've got Virginia, New York, one from Texas, Nathan Smith from Houston Community College drafted an incredible case study. And so you'll definitely want to check that out when we publish. Kansas State, I mentioned earlier, our Canadian institution, and New York is on here a few times. I think Mount Hood is Oregon. This is the I mentioned with the Rebus community, I agreed to lead the pilot project for this. All of our communication and recruiting were done on this platform, and this platform is available for anyone who is interested in this kind of collaborative, open textbook creation project. And so you can visit there's a bit.ly down at the bottom. You can visit our page. This was a good reminder that I need to update this page. It's a little outdated. It still says that we're in the peer review process, but you can sign up to follow. And when we do actually publish the book, everyone who follows the project will receive a notification that it has been released. And that is all I have. I don't know how to turn this back over. But
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really good information, and I look forward to that book. And I noticed that while you were speaking, there were several questions. So
oh, I'm not even paying attention.
No, I mean, understandably, because you're presenting. So at the end, after I'm going to talk a little bit about course marking, and then at the end we can address those questions.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ursula.
All right, so let me share my screen. How's that? Can you see that? All right, great. Let's go here to the next one. So last year, Digitex partnered with ISKME, which is the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management in Education, to survey Texas institutions of higher ed about OER. And one question that we asked was, what terms do they use to mark OER courses in their course schedule? And 50 colleges responded to this specific question. And as you can see, 66% use OER, but there are other terms that folks use. No textbook required, affordable, zero cost, free, and low cost. But OER was obviously the most popular. And you can actually look at this full study, which has a lot of great information about course marking, but then OER specifically about Texas colleges. It's on the Digitex website, and I think that Heather will be putting the link in the chat window. So it's on the Digitex website on the OER page, and you can download the whole page. All right.
I already added it there in the chat room, or the chat box, Ursula.
Awesome. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
All right. So before I worked for Digitex, I was with Austin Community College, and I was coordinating OER efforts. And one of my big focuses was on course marking. And so what we'd created was a specific sort on the online course schedule, and then also in the student self-service, where they could click a box for zero textbook cost or OER courses. They could do both, and then it would come up with all the courses that are OER or zero textbook cost. And it was pretty easy to find it's pretty easy to find on the main online course schedule. What I found was that I spent about 80% of my time gathering the information and about 20% of my time just taking that information and putting it into a spreadsheet. So what I would do is I would talk to every single department, the deans, the chairs, faculty. I often found that a really great resource was whoever was filling out the textbook orders. Oftentimes, the administrative assistants knew everything that was going on in terms of the textbooks. And that they became a really great resource for me. And so about 2.5 months before a semester started, I would start asking them what their ZTC or OER courses would be. And I would also talk to the bookstore. Once bookstore orders were in, I would ask the Barnes & Noble bookstore representative to produce a report of every course that didn't have a textbook associated with it. And we were very lucky. They were really helpful, and they just saw it as a great resource to help them. The more information they had, the better prepared they were to meet students' needs. I also would look at the course schedule, because sometimes faculty would write that their course was OER, but I wouldn't hear about it, that maybe their department chair didn't know about it. And so that would be one way. Philip Anaya from Alamo Open told me that he found a way to search everyone's syllabuses. And I thought, that's great. You could look for keywords like zero cost, open, OER, and find faculty who were offering OER. And then we took this information and we put it in a big spreadsheet sorted by the departments. And then I would share that with the scheduling department, and they were able to tag each of the courses, each of the OER courses as OER or ZTC. And then that's how it ended up on this online sort. And to me, the most exciting thing about doing the course marking is that it allowed us to then gather some data, because all the courses that were OER on every campus and every department were tagged, and we could disaggregate the OER data to find out information about cost savings and about how it was impacting different demographic groups. I just thought it was a great tool, and it got easier each time, but definitely, I mean, as Michelle was saying, it is a time-consuming process, and there are faculty who are assigned at the last minute to a course that that is OER or wasn't OER, and so you just kind of have to be on your toes and keep aware of that. Oh, and one other thing that we did, which was really important, is we developed a consistent course section note, because before we said, well, just put something in that references zero textbook costs or OER, but we found that it was most helpful if we had one standard course section note that was in every single zero textbook costs course. And that so we crafted one, and we just asked people to use it, and it was easy enough for them to cut and paste. So that is all that I have talking about course marking. And I know there's a lot of questions. I saw a bunch of questions in the chat. So are there any specific questions that someone that you would like to ask, or if you want to put something in the chat? Let's look at what we have. Yeah, if someone wants to unmute themselves and if they have a question to ask. I know there were some questions about the language of low cost, no cost. Let's see.
I can jump in here. So it looks like some of these questions may be connected. The question about the vocabulary for defining no cost and low cost. I think this may be connected to how you define a textbook, if I'm understanding that correctly, or what qualifies as a resource. That's certainly a question that we get a lot. So early on, people in history, for example, reached out to ask if what we're now calling excursions that they require counted towards the resource cost, and we decided that it does not. Lots of questions about equipment and supplies. So for our classes, if, maybe they use an open textbook, but then students also have to buy art supplies, does that disqualify them from the low cost tag? And so we put together some guidelines, and it's constantly updated. I will drop the link to our reporting guide into the chat, and that may give you a better sense of the language that we're using and how we're classifying all the different types of materials. And other institutions have done similar things, where things like, calculators or tablets, graphing paper, and that sort of thing are excluded from the cost of the resource itself. Let's see. I'm going to pause right there and take a second look at the chat.
Thank you, Michelle, for answering that.
So I see Justin's question about whether using no cost is adequate to comply with the law, and I honestly don't know the answer. Our rationale was that the bill defined OER very traditionally, that it's free resources that you also have the permission to revise. We weren't sure what to do with those things that there is a cost, so it's OER plus. And it does say OER only. We finally decided that free is going to resonate more with students, and the primary audience is students. I mean, all of this is here not just as a fun exercise and hoops for us to jump through, but because it can have an impact on students. So we wanted to choose language that made sense to them. I would have done everything differently now if I were doing this again. I think there is a lot of value in OER and marking things as OER. And I think a lot of it too is just our student government has been involved in our initiatives for the last 3 years. And so our student body, because of their outreach, our student body is a lot more aware of what OER means. And at least it's not just a confusing jumble of letters, but there is some connection to that phrase. So, but the initial rationale was that OER are part of free resources as long as we define somewhere, and it's on our student guide, that we are including OER in that was good enough. I don't know that anyone's policing it though, so I don't take that as legal advice.
Yeah, this is Scott. If I could chime in, if I was reading the bare letter of the law, I would say that the law requires that OER as defined be marked, and I guess it doesn't say what it has to be marked as, but I'm not sure that technically having a broader category that includes OER actually fits that definition. That might be something that in future legislative sessions, the community might want to propose clearing up. I know I was working on some legislation actually for another state, and we made very clear in there that you wanted to mark OER, but you clearly could use other markings like free or low cost, as long as you define what low cost means. So there's separate purposes in it. Although at this point, I think most of the community would take almost any marking better than no marking at all.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for that. I'm gonna, if there are no more questions, oh, there's one more question.
Yes, from Amy Castillo, we have the following question. She says, our bookstore has printed OER resources listed for a price, but has no mention of it being freely available elsewhere. Do you have advice on how to approach this?
Is it a university bookstore or is it a private bookstore? I mean, who is it?
Does it say? Did she say?
She replied, it's a university bookstore.
Is it operated by the university? That's actually fairly unusual these days. Just from the little experience I have talking to a number of bookstore people around the state, I think that would be, if it's a university-run bookstore, then that's a conversation that actually can be had and probably more easily resolved than if it was one of the majors and you had a corporate entity trying to run it. Have you had conversations with the bookstore themselves?
She said it's an on-campus
It's
bookstore. I'm sorry, an on-campus bookstore run through Follett.
Yeah.
So I that has happened here at UTA as well, and is not an uncommon issue. And there's a number of factors that contribute to it, and some of it is the systems that the bookstores are using, but in some cases it's how faculty are reporting the resource, and ISBNs are kind of lumped into all of this. So it may be that they're working just from the print ISBN, which may be different from the digital ISBN. So there's a way to do it, and with Follett, they do have a note where they can add customized notes and include that it's an OER. I think it's an important conversation to have with the store, but as far as expecting, to change immediately, that hasn't been my experience. I will say though that there is a Doers 3, a group of institutions from the US and Canada are working on this issue and having conversations. We've just done a survey to collect feedback from OER advocates about what their experiences with bookstores were. And this was one that we did get some feedback about. So we're putting together the results of that survey and then starting to have some conversations with stores, and we'll be preparing best practices for getting that kind of change implemented. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully the resource that Doers provides will be helpful for you.
Well, great. Thank you for answering that. And thank you everyone for participating in this inaugural webinar. I'm gonna pass it now to Judith Sebesta, and she can talk about the next webinar in the series.
First, I really would like to thank you, Ursula, for facilitating and presenting, and also for the great information from both Scott and Michelle. So thanks to all of you for just terrific information about OER course marking in Texas. And if you're interested, everyone, please join us for our next webinar coming up on May 19th at 2 p.m. And we're going to have the topic of serving underserved students with online learning. Dr. Carlos Morales, the president of Tarrant County College Connect, is going to join his colleague, Dr. David Pierce, the director of the Weekend College, to talk about their Weekend College and accelerated initiatives. And then we're also going to have Kim Clark of Howard College. She serves as the director of e-learning there, and she is going to talk about programs for deaf and hard of hearing students at their sister institution, Southwest College for the Deaf. So please join us on May 19th for that. Thank you very much, everyone.